Pamaskong handog ng Aquino and Low Law Office. Sasagutin po ang inyong mga immigration questions for free as Kababayan Today. Talk Tuesday starts right now. Kayo po ang nanonood ng nag-iisang Kababayan Today. This is America's first and only daily talk show for and about the Filipinos. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. My name is Janelle Sawyer, Kababayan from Los Angeles, welcoming you to Talk Tuesday. That means bukas po ang aming mga linya ng telepono ngayong hapon dahil kasama po natin ngayon ang ating dalawang kompanyero, Attorney Allison Aquino and Attorney Richard Lowe of Aquino and Lowe Law Firm, to answer anything and everything about immigration. Like I mentioned earlier, this is their Christmas present to all of us, answering your immigration questions for free today. Allison, I guess the first question for me is, what's the latest from the immigration front?
There's actually been a lot happening as far as immigration is concerned. I think the biggest news as far as immigration is really the efforts that are being undertaken with respect to advocating for temporary protected status.
Yes.
And essentially TPS is a humanitarian form of relief that many organizations are advocating for designation of the Philippines to participate in this TPS program, specifically because of the devastation that took place based on the typhoon.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been a lot of call for trying to get benefits for TPS, and it would be a fantastic humanitarian aid to individuals who have suffered.
I remember, Richard, the last time you were here, we talked about that, right? We talked about TPS and what it will do and some different scenarios that will be affected. And I kept harping on the fact that, you know, for change of status, that's going to be easy, and other things. Does it have to be that the person petitioning is affected, or his or her family is affected by directly affected by the typhoon in the Philippines? Does that have that requirement?
Well, for TPS, it would not. They would just designate that anybody from this country would be eligible for TPS if they were in the United States at a certain designated point, and they would be able to apply at that point.
And why do organizations need to clamor for that? What are they clamoring for?
Well, in order to be designated a participating country in TPS, it's traditionally a request that has to be provided by the country who wants the designation. So essentially by the Philippine government needs to put a request to the U.S. government to be designated as a country for TPS. And although legally speaking the request does not need to be made, there are other provisions that would allow the U.S. to unilaterally act and provide that designation. In this political environment, in the reality of just historical reality of TPS, in all likelihood, the designation would only be granted once the Philippine government makes that request to the U.S. government.
And what are the chances of it being granted once the Philippine government makes that request?
Well, as far as the U.S. is concerned, there has been bipartisan support for designation of the Philippines. The president has also indicated a desire to want to designate, and so there has been a lot of support within the United States to provide that humanitarian relief.
So we just need to ask for it.
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to convince President Noynoy Aquino to make the request.
Please.
Essentially.
Yes.
First caller of the day is Andrea Soriano. Andrea, hello and welcome to Kababayan Today.
Hello, good afternoon.
Magandang hapon. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, I came here using somebody else's passport, immigrant passport. Is there any possibility that I could have my papers fixed?
Well, that's a very complicated start to a question. Was the passport a U.S. passport or a Philippine passport?
Philippine passport.
There is a possibility down the road, if there were a visa available to you, for example, through a family member, there are waivers of inadmissibility for fraud that you could get if you had a qualifying relative. So it's not an impossible situation that you can't get over in the future, but it is something that you need to be upfront about and to take care of immediately so that you can work through the very difficult problem.
Right. So we're talking about waivers. What is the difference between waivers and parole?
Well, so a waiver is essentially granted by the Immigration Service because you have committed some type of offense. So, for example, if you committed fraud, then you may need a waiver. If you have a criminal offense, then you may need a waiver.
Okay, get it.
Parole is actually a status that is provided to an individual, and with Well, it's a status so that generally you can travel in and out of the United States, typically with what's called advanced parole. And so that also talks about just their manner in which they've entered the U.S.
Okay, and I've been hearing a lot of this issue about parole. Is something new?
Yes, the president and the executive have looked at doing parole in place, sort of expanding that, which is basically granting parole to people who are already in the United States rather than people who are trying to come into the United States.
Okay.
And those people who are family members of military veterans or current people serving in the military can get parole in place, which is beneficial to people who entered the United States without a visa, because now they would have a sort of a lawful entry. That way they can continue processing in a manner through their immediate relatives.
And these are the ones who cross the border, so to speak, not necessarily for Filipinos, because we would normally have visa coming here.
Exactly. So the Parole in Place program is really benefits those who entered without a visa. So individuals who entered, say, with a tourist visa or H-1B visa, despite the fact that they have individuals in the military, they still would not be able to take advantage of parole in place.
Right. Our phone lines are very, very busy. If you are on hold, please continue to hold. We'll get to your calls in just a little while. If you are watching us from Hawaii, you are getting us on a delayed telecast. So unfortunately, you cannot call. We cannot take your calls for now, but hopefully that will change very soon for Talk Tuesday on Kababayan Today in Hawaii as well. Meanwhile, like I mentioned, we'll get to your calls when we return on the show. Don't go away.
Pagkatapos magpadala,
Transaction number po, 4 and...
Yes?
Wait lang, Lola. Wait a second.
With the chicken.